Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Fake Nerd Book Club. I am Brandon C. McClure, and joining me today is an old friend we haven't spoken in quite a while, Andy Poulastides. How are you, sir?
Hello there. I'm good, thank you. It has been a hot minute, as the kids do say.
Yeah, the last time we talked was Conversation Season 1, which I think came out 2 years ago.
Have you noticed how, this decade, time has lost all meaning? It's
100%.
like you could say it'd be like 2 years ago. You could say it was like 2 months ago. I'd believe both. It's just like time has lost all meaning. We are perpetually stuck in Thursday.
I'll put this in perspective. When we did Conversation, you were talking about writing your Wolf 359 project, and it is now out.
It's a thing. It exists. Behold, a book. See, my name is on a book.
I'm so jealous of that hardcover. It looks beautiful.
Beautiful. It is. I'd love to offer it to people, but Paramount say I can't. So
right.
Sorry.
Why don't you talk a little bit about your podcast, The Great Derelict? Of course, you and we'll get into a Star Trek comic book in a minute, guys. But I want Andy to introduce himself.
What I'll do is I'll say if you want the real skinny, the real lowdown on me, you should go and check out Conversation Season 1, where I had a sit down with the host of this podcast, and we spoke quite extensively about me and my podcast and things. But the short version is I'm a science fiction fan, have been for many, many moons. I do a podcast called The Great Derelict, which is just kind of my random musings about science fiction and anything to do with that. And I got the crazy idea about 2 years ago to write a book about Wolf 359 in the style of World War Z. So not the film. The film is terrible. I'm reading the book. So the book where you have the kind of interviews of people and it kind of paints the narrative doing that. It's that, but with Borg instead of zombies, who are kind of like Borg or like zombies. But yeah, it's that sort of thing basically. And it's 500 pages, 150,000 words, quite traumatic. I've made many people cry with the book. And it's so good that Paramount have told us that we shouldn't have made it as good as we have done by sending us a DMCA strike. So I wear that as a badge of honor. It's nice.
It's interesting. I wonder if this is the first I wonder if this is the first written fan fiction that has gotten this kind of strike.
I think it might be. I think where we fell down is we went to full hog. We did the whole book design and everything, and we made things. I commissioned artwork, and I had LCARs stuff in this. It's all various. I'm sure Brandon is currently putting pages of the PDF on the screen for you to do. Just giving you more work there, mate. It's fine. But we kind of went all out, and I think what happened was we got trolled by a bot because when we got the strike, it's an AI company that does brand integrity. I think is what they're calling it these days. And we used a couple of screen captures from Best of Both Worlds. We had like a shot of Locutus because, we have a chapter called Locutus. And so that got pinged. So I commissioned some more artwork, which at the time of recording is currently being done to hopefully get rid of that. And then weirdly enough, our Twitter page, the header image got pinged for use of the Star Trek Delta. But we don't have the Delta in the header image. So I'm like, okay.
It's weird.
It's a bit weird. I think once you're on the radar for them, though, they just kind of like double down and just start pinging everything.
Sure.
The MCA strikes and everything, you just have to go on YouTube. It's a nuisance thing. Anyone who does video reviews or anything like that with content, these things are all automated. There's no one actually involved in the system. So it's just a case of the bot has said, oh, that looks basically Star Trek-y, copyright claim. And it's like, fair use is a thing. But rather than trying to do a ton of wildfires at once, we're just waiting until we've got the new artworks done. Then we'll re-release the PDF file and then say, there you go. But you can still read the book. It's on Archive of Our Own, or AO3 as the kids call it. And links in the doobly-doo thingies. So yeah.
And and the people who downloaded the PDF beforehand obviously will have the original.
Oh yes. Well, the only difference will be literally is whereas in the previous version there's some screen caps for the chapter dividers. Now it will have artwork created from some fantastic artists as well. So screw you, Pam.
I just want to say I've read about half the book. I think it's incredible. I've been excited for it since our conversation chat. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yes, it was a labor of love is the only way you can describe it. Because no one paid me to do it. Let me assure you of that. And I've made less than zero money on this.
If there was a perfect world, instead of sending you a cease and desist for the book, Paramount would have said, "Hey, why don't we talk and let's get this published together?"
I mean, that would be very nice.
Yeah.
But then, we don't. I don't have to tell you, my friend, we do not live in a perfect world.
No, Paramount is notorious for these kind of things. Ever since, I mean, it got really bad after Axanar, right? Like,
they poisoned the well for everyone that came after them. They screwed the pooch right there. And I have many thoughts on that. We'll save that for another podcast on another day. But I appreciate people making a comparison. But let me just say, no, I've actually produced what I said I would produce, and I haven't charged anyone any money for it.
That's true. Well, so why don't we transition from there to another Star Trek book? So we're actually going to be talking about today a very old, well, not very, very old.
I was going to say, how dare you, sir? How dare you?
An older Star Trek comic. I actually have the original DC Comics printed run of this trade.
But by the way, I dare say one of the best comic covers of all time, or certainly of all Trek. I love that cover. It's an awesome cover. I mean, I love that. It feels like the old 1980s VHS covers, Star Trek 2 or everything like that. I'm like, I love that cover.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about Star Trek, the Mirror Universe Saga, written by Mike W. Barr, with art by Tom Sutton and Ricardo Villagran. This collects, I think it was called Star Trek New Frontiers, 9 through 16.
So when I read it, I didn't read it in this first run because it's a little bit old. So that I believe the first one was in 1984 because this was originally released straight after Star Trek 3. I read it in 1992 when it was issued in a Star Trek magazine we had over here in the UK. I don't know if you had the same one over there. And I don't know what it was called other than it had Star Trek in it. But that was where I read it. And I just knew it as the DC Star Trek comic. I don't know if the New Frontiers thing was a later edition, but I believe at the time it was just Star Trek. I could be wrong.
It could be. I mean, I tried to look for the exact title of it, and there's a couple because this book is so much. I don't know. It's because it's not really that old. What does it say? You said it was 84, I believe it was.
84. It basically come, and I'm sure we'll get into the details as to why. But it came out in the wake of Star Trek 3. It was the comic tie-in to that film. And no, I'm looking on them their internets here. I think New Frontier is the name of this particular. This wasn't called the Mirror Universe Saga at the time when it was released. Yeah. New Frontier is what the name of this story was. Mirror Universe Saga is what the collected paperback is. So it was just part of the Star Trek comic from DC.
Yeah. Well, so why don't we get right into it? So you've read this before. I've not read this before. So I want to get your initial thoughts real quick.
Okay. My initial thoughts from when I first read it or now?
Now.
Oh, I mean, I love this book. I think it's my favorite era of Trek. I love the movie era, the Excelsior class there and up there. I love the Excelsior class, specifically the USS Hood for reasons we won't go into here and now. But it's my era. I love that, and I love the story it has following on from Star Trek 3. I love the idea as well that these characters had an entire adventure between Star Trek 3 and 4. If you go and read the entire run of the DC comics, basically, they started, I think, originally in the wake of Star Trek 2, maybe a bit before that. So you have stories. Star Trek 3 happens. And then what they do is they have this entire adventure with Kirk in command of the Excelsior, going around having adventures, doing space stuff. And then when Star Trek 4 came out, they had to conceive of a way in the comic book to get them all back on Vulcan, with Spock having lost his memory and with a Klingon bird of prey. And they write a story to kind of get you back to where you finished, and it worked. And it also explains why the bird of prey has a different bridge between 3 and 4. So I choose to view this as canon.
Interesting. Obviously, I did not read anything more than this, so I didn't know that they actually did try to MacGyver a way back into Star Trek 4.
Yeah, it kind of comes full circle towards the end. I love some of the characters they bring in here. I don't know if these characters originated in the comic or in the novels, but there's the character of Conan, who is a Klingon officer serving in Starfleet. And this is, 3-4 years before Next Generation. Conan predates Worf, which is kind of cool. He's not in this comic as well, but there was a Horta officer in the comic series called Narat, as I recall. And the Horta are the rock-like beings from the original series, which is great. There was a really cool kind of supporting cast that kind of continued on in the series. And I just love adventures in the movie era. A lot of Star Trek fans today talk about wanting stories in the Lost era and that period between Star Trek 6 and The Next Generation. The stuff with Harriman and the Enterprise B, and these comics are kind of that. But I love it. I mean, even the art style I love. I mean, some of the spaceship stuff gets a little funky in terms of proportions and everything, but
there's a lot of shots. There's a lot of shots where the Enterprise just straight up looks like the Excelsior.
Well, there's a lot of shots. There's one shot where the Enterprise looks like the Excelsior, but generally speaking, it is the Excelsior because, again, the Excelsior is front and center in this story, and I love that because I love the Excelsior. The Excelsior, gorgeous ship.
Yeah, I never read this one before. But I really like the Mirror Universe, and I picked this up a long time ago. IDW had put out some Next Generation Mirror Universe books recently, which is kind of the impetus for starting here. And I have an issue with older comics where many times when I read an older licensed comic, the writers won't accurately get the voices of the characters very well because they're writing in a very different way. They're writing in a very kind of what's the way I want to describe this?
Well, I would put it. It might just be a case of they don't know the material because they're being hired to just write a story. They've given a script, write it. They may have never watched Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever they're writing about. It's just, okay, this character has to do this, and this. Whereas, at least for me, the Mirror Universe one, it works for me. I can hear the character voices in there.
And that's what I was about to say, is that I could very well hear these characters' voices. And I was surprised because, even Kirk and Kirk is surprisingly a difficult voice to nail in writing. You don't think it would be, but it kind of is because of the way Shatner talks. But I really thought that Mike Barr, who wrote the book, really captured Shatner's voice without doing the ... pauses or the whatnot. But you can hear Shatner saying these dialogue.
Well, if you think back to when this is, it's post Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 6, which I think post 2 and 3, which I think are Shatner's strongest performances as Kirk. Star Trek 2 is absolutely peak Shatner without becoming the caricature. And Mike Barr also wrote some novels and things as well. He did a lot of the Star Trek thing, so I think he knew the material well enough. In fact, I think he also did the Marvel novelization for the motion picture. So he's been doing the Star Trek stuff for a while. But even more so than Shatner, he got the other characters as well. There's a great bit where Uhura's left in charge of the ISS Enterprise for a moment, sort of thing. And I just love the line. I go, "It was about damn time." It's just it gets it. But he also gets the Mirror Universe versions as well, which kind of carry over from what we saw from them in the Mirror. Is it Mirror, the original series one? There's so many Mirror Universe episodes now, I can't remember which one's which. But they kind of capture that voice of, Chekhov and Sulu and the other characters. And Spock, who is at the end of Mirror, he goes, "Oh, well, maybe I will turn on the tyrannical empire," and agree to kind of bring it down. And this time he's like, "Nah, I just couldn't be bothered with it."
I did appreciate that Spock's explanation for still being with Tiberius Kirk, as I think is the fan name for the Imperial version of Kirk, is when he says, he's like, "Yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it's ultimately I decided against it."
Yeah, if I'd have done that, I'd have probably died. But it's cool. We're fine.
Yeah. So this is this was, as you mentioned before, this came out after Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock. So it's carrying off of those characters in a kind of what if version of Star Trek 4, what that would have been.
I like to view it as Star Trek 3.5.
Well, I was kind of reading this and I was just thinking they do a lot of stuff in this book that I wish Star Trek 4 did. And I really like Star Trek 4. Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home has a special place in my heart. I love that movie dearly. I've mentioned many times that I lived where they filmed the San Francisco Cetacean Institute.
You know where the nuclear vessels are.
I do indeed. But they have a scene between Kirk and Carol after David died. And Carol Marcus disappears after the Wrath of Khan.
Yep.
And I saw this. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Kirk should go to Carol after this, and they should have a moment where they grieve. And that's kind of where this comic kind of started blowing me away, because I was like, you didn't get this in the movie, and it really sucks that we didn't, because this was a scene that needed to happen. It's like David dies. It's a really important beat in Search for Spock, and then it's never addressed again.
A little bit in 6, but yeah, it's the sense of, you see his picture and he says, I can't trust Klingons because they killed my son, and then, as you say, it's largely forgotten about. But yeah, it's great having that the connection back to Carol Marcus and Genesis, and kind of carrying on that through line. And yeah, this had an impact on Kirk and his perception of himself and how he was, which I really liked. Also, we saw, he sacrificed everything to go and rescue Spock, but showing this one, he was like, okay, yeah, we did that. I don't regret doing this, but now we have to go and face the Piper and to go and do that. And they do kind of address that in Star Trek 4, but this just seems like they were a bit more proactive in doing that and heading off to go and to do them. I mean, for me, obviously, the thing that kind of annoys me most about Star Trek 4 is them getting the Enterprise A at the end of it, when they should have had the Excelsior, which they do in this book, so that's fine.
You think they should have had the Excelsior, not the A?
Yes! Yeah, don't get me... I have strong opinions about Starfleet registry numbers, and the A annoys me quite a lot.
Well, but isn't the only reason why the A is given is because at that point Star Trek: The Next Generation had started?
No, it was before The Next Generation started. That came, yeah. It was probably well in production, but Star Trek 4 is 1986, and Next Generation didn't air until 87, so it was in pre-production.
Oh,
but, it wasn't on the way yet.
They probably had wanted to kind of make that idea that, oh, this is the Enterprise D. Where did that come from? Here's the Enterprise A, and we off to the races.
It's entirely possible. I just think you should have had the Excelsior. Much better ship.
Yeah, you like the Excelsior a lot, and so what's interesting about this? But here, most of my Star Trek is the Next Generation era. That's kind of where I really love all of Star Trek, but. The Excelsior class starship in the Next Generation is a workhorse starship. It's very much it's a taxi essentially. And I forgot, because of that has been in my mind for so long, that when it debuted as exemplified in this book, it was the most advanced starship that Starfleet has ever produced. Like, so far advanced that it could do freaking miracles in this book.
Oh, I mean, that's the thing about it. When it was introduced in Star Trek 3, the Great Experiment, this massive ship there that was so sleek and modern, and it just kind of exemplified the name Excelsior. Just kind of suggests that nothing is impossible, and I just love that shot. And it had the biggest dick on the planet as a captain, Captain Styles. My one complaint, I think, with the book is, and I think this is kind of testament that this was probably being written while Star Trek 3 was in production. And so probably Mike Barr had access to the scripts, but not necessarily to the footage, is they don't quite get Styles right. They paint him as kind of an arrogant guy who knows all, but he doesn't have his moustache. He doesn't have his swagger stick, that kind of sense of self-superiority. He has a very British officer energy in the film, which is a little bit missing here. In this, he's just a bit of a spoiled child. But yeah, I love... how Kirk is able to get one up over him throughout the book series as well, and I love how Styles just keeps trying to lord it over him, saying, "No, well, you threw it all away, and you could have had. Look at the ship you could have had. Let me give you a wonderful tour of this ship and show you all of this." And it's just like, yeah, okay, Styles, yeah, it's fine.
It's really funny to see, like, the Excelsior was a really advanced ship when it was introduced, and we had all these things, but like this book really like brings it even more so into the advanced, like, oh, look at the sick bay with all these robots and things. Look at our transporters can beam through all the. We have anti-cloaking technology, and
I was going to say they had tracing phases, didn't they? Where you could just
And I thought it was really funny because like it really felt like the Excelsior has abilities. Like Excelsior is like the Golden Age Superman, where it has abilities that it needs at the moment.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fun.
It's really fun. I mean, and I think that's kind of how they originally envisioned the Excelsior in the movie era. It was meant to show that kind of step change from the original series to that what was to become in the Next Generation. If you want to look at it in terms of aircraft, it's like going from a Spitfire to an F-15. You know, there's quite a step change there, and that was great. But what I do love in here as well, you still get that bit of nostalgia when you see the Mirror Universe Enterprise, the ISS Enterprise, and you know when Kirk first steps onto that bridge and he has that moment of, what's her name, Melania goes, it's like you've never seen it before, and he goes, no, I just didn't think I'd ever see it again. And you know, little touching moments there, and it's. I just like the fact that they went back to the Enterprise. We also get a source of separation before we get that in Next Generation as well. So
this is the first time we saw the original Enterprise do a source of separation, right?
Well, it's mentioned in the original series, but we never see it, and it was definitely in. It was storyboarded for the motion picture, but I think this is the first time, canonically, narratively, we see it happen, where we see them separate the saucer to go and take on the Excelsior.
And Kirk has this moment where it was really funny because Kirk has this moment where he's asked, like, what about the other crew And he's just like, well, it's too bad. That's too bad. Well, let's move on.
Oh yeah, no, he's playing up the kind of evil villain. And another voice I think Mike Barr gets really well here is he really does get the kind of evil Kirk that we only saw briefly in the original episode, but it's that manic energy, you know, that kind of like, you know, I will do absolutely anything. You know, it's all about me, and you know, my furthering my agenda here, and to do that. And you know, he captures that voice really well because he is an absolute nut job.
One of the things I actually kind of wish this book had done more was using the Mirror Universe Kirk more, and I think we get a lot of him in the beginning, but there's about 4 chapters in the middle here where he's just not present. He's
having a nap.
He's having a nap, and I wish that the Mirror Universe Kirk was more of a central villain for Kirk to have to deal with, because I liked seeing the two of them have to come together to have to butt heads. I like that dynamic.
I think the problem you'd have there, though, potentially, is you might just end up remaking Wrath of Khan. And as we know from Into Darkness, you should never remake Wrath of Khan. I think when you have the two sides of the same coin butting heads, you know, how do you write that in a way that wouldn't just feel like retreading that sort of ground there? Yeah. I quite liked, I mean, this is also the first real time, I think, ever, we've had a good look at the Mirror Universe Society, you know, where they go and explore Earth with the Resistance on Alcatraz. And you get that, you know, the story is very much, again, it's just Kirk taking the law into his own hands because that's just what Jim Kirk does. But, you know, going off to head off the invasion fleet and coming up with this plan to use the Excelsior, which is so advanced it can destroy fleets without, you know, nary an issue. And also just the magic. Fleet? Yeah, just need an Excelsior, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I do really like that we see the Mirror Universe Society, the Mirror Universe Society here, because the Mirror Universe is something that has, I think, rightfully interested fans since its first debut in Mirror, the original episode. And it's really interesting that we never saw the Mirror Universe again until Deep Space Nine. Because I think maybe there was a desire not to retread the same ground for the Next Generation that the original series did. So they didn't want to.
There was a Mirror Universe novel for the Next Generation by Diane Duane, which I think was called The Mirror Darkly. I think so, which was very cool. A lot of what you see in yesterday's Enterprise was based off of the depiction of the Mirror Universe Enterprise from that book.
Right. Okay.
So like phasers, the raised platform and things there.
Yeah.
So there was a Mirror Universe novel, but I just don't think they had the story to tell it. Plus, we did yesterday's Enterprise, which is kind of Mirror Universe-esque to a certain extent.
But yeah, about. Go ahead.
What I was going to say, what was interesting is when we went into DS9, though, they completely turned it on its head, and it was no longer the case of your favorite characters but evil. Now it was your favorite characters but subjected to slavery as a result of the consequences of what we saw in the original Mirror Universe.
I always kind of felt that was interesting that the DS9 episodes they took the idea that Spock was going to actually make some change, and he did so, which weakened the Empire, and then they were subjugated by the Klingons and Cardassians. And so it's really interesting to see a Mirror Universe where that effectively doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Or at least doesn't happen yet. Because I guess you can make the case that the rebels win at the end of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was quite interesting as well because they kind of explain where the point of divergence was in this universe to
that's right.
thing. And obviously this predates Enterprise by quite a bit. So, in Enterprise, we saw the moment when the Vulcans land, and then Zephyr Cochrane pulls out a shotgun and shoots the Vulcan dead, and they raid the ship. Here, it was the Earth-Romulan War was the point of divergence. Romulus won and then enslaved Earth for about a decade. And it was after that when they overthrow the oppressors there, they decided that they would never again be subjugated and would go on to build their empire. So that was the point of divergence that we had there. And I was going to say one of my favorite depictions of the Mirror Universe actually was in the novel verse, which is again kind of TNG onwards, but it kind of shows that Spock was playing a long game. Like, he was playing four-dimensional chess, where he understood that to destroy the empire, it had to first be destroyed so that the people would then rise up to be free, but without the fascist overtones, effectively. And so he made provisions and caches to enable that when that happened, they would be able to survive and get through. And that's one of my favorite series. And if you ever get around to doing those bits of the novels, I'll come back and talk about those. But I really enjoy this look at the Mirror Universe because, as I said before, I love the movie era. I love the Monster Maroon uniforms. I love the Excelsiors. I just love this era. This hornblower in space, I think, is when it's kind of encapsulated its best.
You and I have a similar love for the Monster Maroons. They're one of my favorite uniforms as well. I don't get the love for the Excelsior, I'll be honest. I'm more of a Constitution class guy, which, it's fine. But
I have those too.
Oh, yeah. I love the Constitution class starship. It's my favorite. All iterations of it. I've liked every type of Constitution class I've ever seen. I think they're all really beautiful. But I think what's really fun is to see that the Mirror Universe, because the Mirror Universe, there's this kind of idea that what the Prime Universe does, the Mirror Universe is also doing. So we even get a hint of the Mirror Universe is building a version of the Excelsior, just not quite as advanced. And we get to and we see the Monster Maroons. They've evolved the Monster Maroons, but the only difference is that they have the Terran logo.
There's three big differences with their Monster Maroons. One is they're a slightly darker. Four big differences. One, they're a slightly darker shade of red, which you can see on the screens whenever you see them on screen together. Sure. The Terran ones are more of a darker burgundy color as opposed to the brighter color that the Maroons are. Two is the insignia, as you say. Three is they tend to have a blue sash with a
knife.
The knife, which is kind of a holdover from the original series depictions. And lastly, they have a Southwest belt, which is a belt with a black leather strap which goes across, because you can't be a fascist state without having a black belt with a Southwest belt. That's just a rule.
Now, there is a variant of the Monster Maroons in the Mirror Universe that the Prime Universe doesn't have, and it's the female variant, which I thought was incredibly hilarious to just be a top with the same little white stripe on the shoulder.
Yeah. Again, you can't be evil without a crop top. It's like a rule. Although I would like to say, why don't we see more of the male officers wear the crop top one? Damn it, equality for all. Let's see Sulu in the crop top. Eh?
Well, perhaps the Mirror Universe is just far more sexist than the Prime Universe.
That tracks, to be perfectly fair. But yeah, it's I just like those moments where you have Kirk and Tiberius facing off against each other, and the kind of dualities, and you just give him a little bit of a slap upside the head because that's what the evil ones do.
Yeah, I like that. I really appreciate whenever people allow Kirk to be what he is, which is a good statistician. And when because he's kind of playing the long game when it comes to the mirror, the Empire, and even with his counterpart. Even when they're first under attack and they're not quite sure what's happening, when the ISS Enterprise is attacking the Excelsior, and Kirk is like, if I were this guy, I would do it this way. So maybe you don't do it. And Styles is like, oh, Kirk, you don't know what you're talking about. This is the Excelsior. And so I really like that they allow Kirk to just be this kind of person, because so often people just forget that Kirk isn't what fans think, what like from an outside perspective, what Kirk is, which I've.
Well, it's the old. Kirk is the bookworm. Kirk is the nerd. Kirk is the one who studies the strategy. It's Picard who was the wild one going out at all hours, drinking and getting stabbed through the heart by the Nausicaans for being in dive bars. It's not really what you expect, but that was the reality of it.
Yeah, I also
I was going to say I quite liked how Jim Kirk instantly just hit it off with was it Melania, the Kirk's woman, whatever it was. It was just like just straight in there making out,
And she's from the first episode, right?
Yeah, she's from the Mirror episode of the original series. But yeah, it's just like no question, no time whatsoever. Straight into bed with her. It's just like, that's Jim Kirk.
Oh, I haven't seen you in 15 years. You still look hot though.
Oh yeah.
I just turned to a page that I want to highlight, which is when Spock and Spock are mind meld fighting.
Yeah.
Just an electrifying sequence. Like, it's really weird. It's because it's just different angles of just the same shot of the two of them touching foreheads. Yeah. And it's just and you hear the dialogue through their mind meld. And it's such a really intense sequence. It's such a difficult sequence to do right and make intense. And I thought that they handled it very well. Also,
they kind of left that quite ambiguous. Because that ends at the end of, I think, the second issue of the series, where Spock just basically goes, very well, I'll defeat you. And you kind of don't really know who's won or what's happened. You just see, there's feet on the floor and a Spock is saying, very well, that is the end of it. And it's only in the next issue when you get the reveal that they're actually now working together. They were very clever as well. When you first see the Enterprise in the book, we kind of go from Kirk on the Bird of Prey going to Regular One for the funeral. And then it cuts to the Enterprise approaching Regular One. And it almost feels like a misprint, like this should be at the beginning of a book. We're kind of getting
an introduction there.
Or something like that, because, they hide Spock's beard in the way it's framed. And, it's all done this way until you get the big reveal where they fire the phasers and you've got the crew shot of them all sitting there with the Terran badges that you say, oh, wait, no, these are the evil ones.
Yeah, it's a really good misdirect. I also think that the artwork is really good up to a certain point. I think they have an issue distinguishing Chekhov from Kirk. They're both brown-haired white people.
Yeah.
And so that was really difficult. Sometimes I'd be reading Chekhov's line and I'd be like, oh, wait, no, this was supposed to be read in a Russian accent, not Kirk.
If you don't change all the V's to W's, how are we going to know?
Yeah, exactly. So it was really, so I think the artwork is really fun and really good. And I really like how fluid it is with the kind of like 80s art, sci-fi artwork with all the squiggly colors and things. And I think the ships look really fun, even if they sometimes look a little funky. But the
big fleet battles, though, which is great,
right? But the character models are I think really they stand out because they're up to a point really good artistic representations of the main cast. Yeah. Again, with the exception of sometimes it's a little confusing with Kirk and Chekhov.
Yeah. Well, I will say if you're reading this with the IDW reprint, there's a habit of a minute where they go back and recolor stuff. Yeah. And they kind of painted over it, and it looks very flat in terms of how they've done it.
Really?
And it's just a bit of a disappointment that they've gone and done that. The artwork is still good, but the colours now are just far too oversaturated, and I dare say more cartoony than they were in the one that you have there.
That's really interesting. So I almost picked that up. So that's just so people know, this book that we're talking about has been reprinted by IDW as Star Trek Classics: The Mirror Universe Saga. And I considered picking it up, but I decided against it because I already had this book. I'm kind of glad I did now because I really like the colors in this book. I think they're really fun. There's something unique about colors from this era that you don't want to get rid of.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just how it was printed or the expectation of the paper was going to be printed in. 1980 comic book paper was not the highest quality paper out there. So, but yeah, there was if you look online, you can find it. The more recent one. But yeah, the colors are just very. It's like someone's just kind of painted over them, and I'm not a fan, if I'm honest.
I really like how much how much of the story comes, how much they were able to mine from the Mirror episode. I mean, it's like a 45-minute episode of television that came out in the 60s. And they're able to mine all these different like the Tantalus field comes back into play that we talked about. The girl, which I forgot her name all of a sudden.
I want to say it's Melania, but I will look into that while you talk.
Yeah, go ahead. So like they even reference back to it, and I just thought that was really unique and really felt like this feels like it was a book written by a Star Trek, a person who has been engaged with Star Trek for so long that they know the series backwards and forwards.
It was Millennia, by the way. Sorry, Marlena. So Marlena.
Yeah, let's go with Milena.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're right. It's the person writing this not only knows the material but has a love for the material. There's a lot of references and connections in there as well. Also, just silly things as well, like the ship names that are being used there. You have on the Federation side, you have the Courageous, which is a ship that we're all kind of familiar with. It's a name that's kind of evokes that sense. But when you get over to the Mirror Universe, you have the Nixon. Which I thought was quite fun. And then you also have the Farragut shows up as well. There was a Nagura, which is that's a deep cut there, because Nagura is the admiral who promotes Kirk to admiral in the motion picture, effectively. He was going to be a much bigger character in Phase 2, effectively. But I mean, that's the kind of reference that you have to know your Star Trek to pick up on that. So.
Yeah, there's references to like behind the scenes stuff, like you just said with Nagura. Like there's things that it wasn't easy access back then in the 80s, like it is now. Right now,
there's no memory alpha.
There's no memory alpha, and like this person writes this book as if there was a memory alpha, and I was really surprised about that.
Well,
there's real quickly. There's a USS Christopher Pike, which I appreciated.
I like that as well. Yeah, NCC 1709. But what I also liked, that in itself was a deep cut, because if you think about it, we didn't really. The only real reference you'd have had to Pike would have been the Menagerie. So that
the cage hadn't even happened.
Exactly. That was never it. No, what was I going to say? Trying to Fort Develop Station. Oh well, whatever it's gone, it has now gone now.
So the Mirror Universe Carol is killed.
Yeah, quite early on.
And we learn early that at least Kirk thinks that the Mirror Universe David is killed. Kirk killed both his son and his baby mama, I guess.
Well, I was going to say this is Tiberius, just so we're clear. But he's being evil. So, I remember what I was going to say now. Circling back, depictions of the Klingons and Romulans, which is something that, aside from the Klingons in the motion picture and obviously Christopher Lloyd, basically in Star Trek Ferrero, this was like the first depictions of Klingon homeworld, the idea of a Klingon emperor, Kahlus IV, I think he was Kahlus IV. It was the first time seeing that. And then also the Romulan Klingon alliance, which was a thing in the original series, kind of bringing those in. I mean, I felt the Romulan uniforms might be a little problematic. I don't know. They just felt a little wrong. But it was great exploring those bits of the lore, which just hadn't been touched upon since the original series, although in the novels and things like this, other writers had done stuff with those. But yeah, it was great just seeing that on screen.
It's really interesting having a character in Starfleet who is Klingon before Worf was introduced, and not. I'm sure they go into it, but like in this book, not go into the ramifications of the fact that there's a Klingon serving on the Enterprise. So
Conan, and again, I can't remember if he originated in the comics or in the books, but he's a pacifist, and he that's part of the reasons why he came to serve in the Federation there. And it's a really interesting character. I really like him. I even named a ship in the 359 book after Conan. It's USS Conan in there. Cool. But yeah, I just love that you have that. There's a Lieutenant Bearclaw, I think she's called as well. There's a whole little cast of like, you'd almost call them the next generation, but they're serving alongside Kirk and everything like this, and they have little side adventures as you're going along. And there's a great moment where they all want to come on the Excelsior with Kirk, and they go, come help us. And he says something along the lines of, no, you're all terrible, but if I don't take you along, sort of thing, you might end up with the Klingons, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So come on the adventure with us.
Yeah. I really appreciated that. Kirk likes his crew, even if he doesn't know them all. He's just like, yeah, why not? Let's all go on an adventure. That's all. Yeah. I really like when he's talking to Starfleet also. And Starfleet is like, yeah, okay, thanks for dealing with the Mirror Universe versions of you, but you got to come to Earth now. And he's just like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the Mirror Universe, though. Yeah.
I'm going to let you spend the time to get your fleet together. I'm going to go and deal with them, and I'll be back soon. Borrowing the ship, bye.
Yeah. I like you borrow the Excelsior.
Yeah, just get Styles out in a warp sled and just off you go, Starbase 13. And
one of the things I wanted to bring up, because you just reminded me about the warp sled. Did you ever play the video game? I think it's called Star Trek Shattered Universe.
Oh, I kind of started it, but it was a PlayStation game. I think it was PlayStation 2.
Yeah, it's PlayStation 2, and you play someone on the Excelsior as it's transported to the Mirror Universe.
Yeah, yeah. I think they pull some ideas from this into that game as well.
Yeah, the fighter shuttles that you use in that game feel very much as at least a visual inspiration from this book, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. No, it's. I think a lot of the. I mean, like I said, Conan as a character, you can see a clear line through to Worf in there. Also, I think someone could be wrong. I don't think Worf ever said he was the first Klingon in Starfleet. Just he was the only Klingon in Starfleet.
Oh, that's a good point.
I think later
I think later it's become the first, but I think in the beginning it was the only.
Well, in the beginning of Next Generation, the Klingons and the Federation, the Klingons were supposed to be part of a Federation. And there was a scene where they actually take a phone call from a Klingon, and it has the Federation logo and the Klingon logo, kind of behind him, and they just quietly retcon that later on.
Right. I mean, they did that a lot. I mean, the early Next Generation, what Roddenberry wanted Next Generation to be, with like the Romulans were going to be the main villains and the Klingons part of the Federation. It was all kind of work in progress stuff that just didn't really come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's a lot of ideas that are in here. I don't know how many of them carried into because I've read most of the TNG Mirror Universe comics as well. They're very good. I think the first one was the strongest of those ones, and then it kind of. I think what's nice here is it's a nice, short, contained story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then that's it. And spoiler alert for the rest of the DC comics, they never really go back to it. This is kind of a story they want to tell, and that's it. Yeah. The TNG ones, it's a little bit. I'll get you next time, Gadget. Next time.
Well, I want to push back on one thing. This isn't short. This is 8 issues.
8 issues, yeah, and you compare that to, say, the ongoing Mirror Universe one, which I think is 8 trade paperback issues, if you will, or the ongoing Darth. How many Darth Vader comics have we had now in the Star Wars run?
A lot, but I did feel the length for this one. I think it's a little on the long side. But I don't think there's any wasted real estate in this book, which is something that's it's just interesting to say that it's either too long or not wasted. I don't know.
I do get your point. I think it's paced well, but I also think if you think about it, this would have been released monthly or bi-weekly originally. Yeah. Because the US, I think your comics in the UK, the comics used to be weekly. I think in the US though they were monthly. Don't quote me on that. Yeah. So every month you'd have been getting one of those issues. So I think that was enough to kind of keep your interest throughout it. It doesn't feel wasted. Each issue as well has because that's another rare thing when you have a big collective story like that. You often find that the overall story works, but the individual episodes are kind of just hit and miss. Each issue of this, though, I think works as its own little vignette or mini episode, and they all have a nice beginning, middle, and end, a nice little through line. The only bit I think felt a bit rushed was how how they dealt with the mirror counterparts in that sense of Saavik wakes up and then she kind of plays along for a little bit and then she gets Kirk out. And then I did quite like how Jim Kirk puts them on the shuttle and they go call for help, and then the Nagura shows up and goes, "Can you confirm you're actually Jim Kirk?" "Yes, I confirm we're Jim Kirk." "Okay, great. Fire the phases at him, and we're claiming the bounty."
Yeah, I did appreciate. What an unceremonious end to the Empire version of Jim Kirk
and the rest of the crew, because they're all on there. They're just kind of like,
yeah. And I do appreciate that he like immediately kills Saavik too, because he's just like, Saavik would never turn me against Spock.
Yeah.
I also there's another Mirror Universe character that I didn't expect coming into this book, but it's Mirror Universe David. Towards the middle of the book, we were introduced to. He's the leader of the Resistance. And I once again, like, one of those things that, like, I really like Voyage Home, but one of those things that I wish Voyage Home had dealt with is David, and having this Kirk deal with his grief through another version of David, I think just was really strong. I appreciate the plot beat.
I mean, we get the CGI head of David in the Voyage Home, and that's not quite the same. But it's something they kind of did with DS9 as well, when Cisco meets Miri Jennifer as well there, and they kind of have this. There's a touching moment at the end of the comic where, that David goes, "Would it be okay if I called you father?" And he goes, "Of course, son." It almost feels like they've had a second chance and they've been able to reconnect with what they've lost, which is, in a very real way. And I think it's a nice. It has a nice end. I mean, it leaves it open if they did want to go back, but they never do. But David has what was the Terran fleet, or at least a large part of it there, and is off to go and cause shenanigans. And who knows? Maybe that's what leads to the DS9 version, or maybe it leads to the TNG comic era. Who knows?
The only thing that really sucks about this book, as far as like canon goes, because you can fit canon, you can fit books and comics into canon as easily.
I was going to say
as you want.
You can do it if you really set your mind to it. You can make it work.
Yeah, there's I like the idea. I kind of got some pushback on Twitter about this a little while ago, but I like the idea of there's beta canon and alpha canon. I always look at beta canon as like slightly misshapen puzzle pieces where they don't quite fit well into the puzzle, but you can still fit them in there if you want to.
Well, this is the great. I mean, Star Trek is kind of unique in that built into it is a sense that you can have multiple universes, and we've seen this with the Mirror Universe, and then we see it explicitly with the 09 Star Trek film. I really don't see any reason why you can't have multiple mirror universes, almost, where they're all existing slightly different. One of the reasons why I'm really salty about Coda is it basically says no, we can't have a mirror novel universe which is separate to the continuity, so we're just going to make it never happen. Save that for another podcast. But yeah, I like that the Mirror Universe Saga version of the Mirror Universe is doing something a bit different to what DS9 did, or what TNG one did, or what Discovery did. I mean, I think it's safe to say that the Discovery version of the Mirror Universe is going in different directions to what this depicts. Yeah.
One thing that the reason why I stepped in is because I said that Star Trek Online was beta canon. Star Trek Online fans don't like that. And
what would they like us to call it?
Canon, I guess. But like, because the Enterprise F was in Star Trek Picard season 3, and it was unceremoniously decommissioned and for the Enterprise G, and Online in continuity takes place after.
Star Trek Online is 2409 is when it starts, and I don't know if the years are kind of going consecutively, but yeah, it's because Star Trek 09 came in the wake of the Star Trek Online came in the wake of the 09 film, and the 09 film starts with Spock going back to in time in the Jellyfish Craft, and that was all 20. Read the Countdown Star Trek comic, which some of it's now canon, some of it's kind of it's squiffy, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff.
I like the Star Trek Countdown comic. I was really surprised because Kurtzman wrote that comic, that a lot of it ended up not being canon when they did Picard.
I think they just tweaked things. Well, Data's Resurrection, but also things like in 09, it's a different star goes supernova, which then destroys Romulus. In Picard, they just say, now it's Romulus star. That went supernova.
Yeah.
Which makes more sense.
Speaking of the Kelvin timeline, did you ever read the Kelvin comics?
Yep. I was really annoyed when they stopped doing those too.
Me too. I have them all. They did a Mirror Universe, like a Kelvin Mirror Universe that I quite liked.
They did Kelvin Mirror Universe, and they also did, I think it was maybe the last one of the comics, where they crossed over with the Prime original series, Kirk and everything as well. So you had like TOS, Kirk and Spock and everything interacting with Kelvin, Kirk and Spock, and that was kind of cool.
They also had a DS9 crossover, like a Kelvin DS9 crossover, which I thought was fun.
Justice for the Kelvin verse.
Yeah, man, I like the Kelvin verse. Anyway, so going back to the Enterprise F thing with the Star Trek Online thing, like this idea that yeah, okay, so you can kind of, again, this is a puzzle piece that you can kind of like shove into there. The only thing that's slightly off is the Romulan War bit, which is the 10-year Romulan War that ends with the Romulans winning.
Some of the Klingon stuff as well is a bit squiffy now because they have Kahless before, who is like said is great grandson of Kahless, and they've now changed around. But yeah, it's fine. You can have
maybe the Mirror Universe Kahless was born after. The main universe Kahless.
Or maybe, Kahless 4 is, how in the UK every king can choose their own name if they want to. And so, George the Sixth was actually born Albert. So,
And in a couple of years from this issue, well, not a couple of years, but a number of years after this issue was released, they would introduce Gorkin as the Klingon Emperor
Chancellor.
Chancellor? I forgot what they called them.
The Chancellor, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all I got as far as notes goes.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a solid story, and you can read it. You can read the trade paperback, enjoy it, and not have to pick up anything else if you don't want to. There's nothing in there that kind of like suggests you have to do it. The story ends with them doing what I wanted them to do. They give Kirk the Excelsior so he can go and have adventures with that, basically, and then he goes off, and the rest of the DC comics are Kirk and his crew on the Excelsior. Spock's given command of the USS Surak, I believe, who later on ends up back on the Excelsior because, of course they do. But yeah, it's they have other adventures, and it's great. And yeah, I really enjoy this series. I do think that this is the strongest that the DC run was. This was like the high water mark, and the stuff afterwards, your mileage may vary. But it is fun just watching how they circle back around to Star Trek 4 when they all have to get back to where they are so they can incorporate that film into the canon.
I do really appreciate the ending of this book just being like this admiral having been beaten by Kirk. He can't fire Kirk.
The press, didn't he? He leaked it all to the press, which was great.
Yeah, Kirk leaks the whole thing to the press, and this admiral is just like, well, I can't do anything to you, so take the Excelsior and get the hell out of my hair.
Yeah, you've broken it twice. You take it, you fix it, and come back later.
Yeah, Kirk's the test because it was really fun because they realistically they knew that whatever next Star Trek film would be, they'd be back on the Enterprise. So like he's like, go test the Excelsior. You're doing its shakedown cruise, and I
don't think they knew. I don't actually think they knew they were going to have the Enterprise A. That was quite a late decision, from my understanding, in Star Trek 4. There was talk that he would get the Excelsior again, and that's kind of why we do the double bluff when he's flying through space dock and you see the Excelsior and then it kind of disappears and comes back. But it's just a great little self-contained story in what is, to my mind, the best era of well, it's certainly my era of Trek, the one I grew up with, which is that which is the movie universe era. Everyone's running around in their bell-bottom pants and their monster maroon tops, and all of the ships are refit class era. I love it.
I do too. I have a.
I was going to say, I do love as well, though. You know how they spent a lot of money doing the Genesis effect in Star Trek 2? It's like one of the first uses of CGI. So they use it all the time. I think it's in Star Trek 3 and 4, just in the background. Yeah, they have that in here as well. Like they have him start doing the whole Genesis speech in there. And I'm just like, they made sure they got it in there.
That was really funny. So I've got a question for you before we get out of here, which is I want this rant from you. You said they should have the Excelsior at the end of Star Trek 4. Question one: do you think it should be rechristened to the Enterprise because Kirk commanded the Enterprise?
I don't mind if they want to recommission it Enterprise. I don't think they have to, but yeah, if you wanted to recommission it to Enterprise, it's fine. What I take issue with is the registry number.
That's my other question. What is that issue? I want to know.
So the reason registry numbers exist, it is so you have a track of what the ship is, effectively. If you imagine somewhere in memory alpha there is a large book, even bigger than this, a book to which the word tome might be associated. Within this book is a list of every starship that was ever made. And when we get to the Enterprise A, it's a bit squiffy. Some people think it's a new build ship, but I counter, it's not. They stopped building Constitution class ships quite a while earlier. This is another ship that was renamed Enterprise. Mm-hmm. But we don't know what ship it was because they changed the number. Sometimes you change the names of ships, for reasons. In the US Navy at the minute, there's a few ships which were named after a little to-do that you guys had around the late 19th century, a little civil war, as it were. And people have suddenly realized maybe naming our ships after people on the losing side, not such a hot idea. So they're renaming those ships. But you know what they're not doing? They're not changing the number of those ships. So you can keep track of what the ship is. The registry numbers should be sequential, so you kind of know roughly where the ship is in the sequence. Like if you look at the battleships in the US, the USS New Jersey is BB 62 because there were 61 battleships before you got to New Jersey, and then and so on and so forth. I can't tell you how many ships were made before the Enterprise G because those numbers meaningless. It means nothing. And I don't know what ship was the Enterprise A before it was changed because they kept the 1701-A. It shouldn't be that. It should be 1717 if it was the Yorktown, or 17 something. I think 30 if it was the Taiho. But we don't know. No. So registry numbers stay with the ship. You can change your name. Name doesn't matter. You keep the registry number.
So my question is why if Gene Roddenberry was a Navy man, why did
he wasn't a Navy man?
Oh,
he was an Air Force man.
Oh, maybe that's what happened then.
He was an Air Force man who had an affinity for the Navy. But these are the sort of decisions you got to understand. Gene Roddenberry's relationship with Star Trek after the motion picture, he was quietly kind of shuffled off to a corner, and he got back in a little bit when he came to the Next Generation. But after about season 1, he was once again quietly shuffled off to a corner. So Gene Roddenberry didn't have a huge amount of say in what happened and what went on. And it's one of my biggest issues with Picard season 2 and 3 is how I got a lot of problems with Picard season 2 and I have a lot of problems with Picard season 3, but they don't get the Navy side of Starfleet. Like they call the Titan a refit. It's not a refit. And if it was a refit, you wouldn't change the registry number to -A. You would keep the registry number it had previously. And
that refit thing bugged me too.
Yeah. I mean, they did it on the Stargazer before that. And then when you get to Discovery in season 4, when it gets to the 31st century, and they refit the Discovery, and again, they give it a new registry number. The number stays the same. You don't change the number.
Isn't the registry number in Discovery? I can't believe I'm going to come to Discovery's defense. In Discovery's defense, isn't it that they want to keep it a secret that you're wearing a Disco shirt, that it is a ship from the past?
Well, if you were going to do that, I have a couple of points counted. Number 1, maybe change the name. Number 2, don't just change it to the registry number to 1031-A, suggesting that there have been no other ships called Discovery in the entire 1,000 years prior to that. And number 3, it clearly is the Discovery. Even with the refit, it looks exactly the same. It's just slightly shinier. It's when Next Generation, everything was running, and through the movie years, you had people like Hans Zimmerman. Hans Zimmerman. Zimmer's the musician. But the guy who wrote the Star Trek technical manual along with Mike Okuda, who would kind of say, oh no, it doesn't work like this, it should work like this, or there was someone in the room to address these points, and that's been missing, I think, in recent Trek, and I would like to get that back into it. But that doesn't forgive the fact that this all started with fucking Star Trek 4 with the Enterprise A.
And there we have it. Star Trek 4 is a terrible movie because of the registry number.
Basically, yeah. Also, the music's not great in that, but that aside, loads of fun.
All right. Well, anyway, so that was a great way to end this. So this was Star Trek the Mirror Universe Saga, and you can check out, of course, the current. Well, if you want to read the current version of it, it's Star Trek Classics, the Mirror Universe Saga. But
You could find that version. You could find that version online, but more importantly, you can still get the original print on like Amazon and secondhand bookshops. Support secondhand bookshops; they're important, folks. But also, the cover on that one is just beautiful. It's absolutely amazing. If I could get that as a poster, I would hang that up.
And this is coming from a guy who really likes J.K. Woodward, who is the cover artist of the new edition. This is the better cover, I think. I really like this book. I'm really happy we read this one. Andy, thank you for joining me on this.
Always a pleasure, sir. Yeah.
The next time we will talk about, I think what I want to do is, and this could change, which is Star Trek Mirror Images, which is the other TOS era Star Trek book, which has a kind of it has a middle chapter, which is Picard taking over the Stargazer. Which leads into the.
Yeah, I was going to say that I believe is a prequel to the TNG Mirror Universe ones, but it was written after the TNG ones were. So the stuff that's featured in there that started in the TNG comic Mirror Universe one. I could be wrong, but that is my understanding.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't read this one yet. But yeah, when we come back, we'll probably be reading this one. So stay tuned. Read ahead if you want. Whatever. I like the Mirror Universe, and I really like the Mirror Universe comics, so I wanted to give that a whirl and have a outlet to do so. So, what do we call it there? Andy, why don't you plug the Great Derelict and anything else?
Well, you can find the Great Derelict over at road2media.com, or just search for the Great Derelict on your podcatcher of choice. It's just me and a guest. Brandon's been on it at least once, maybe twice. Yeah, but once. We have to fix that, get you back again. But I just talk about everything and anything. I just at time of recording last week, I did an episode talking about Star Trek Into Darkness 10 years on. What are our feelings about that? And I just recorded today an episode about Babylon 5, The Road Home. So, there's a little bit of everything in there. And if you want to read We Have Engaged a Borg, the oral history of the Battle of Wolf 359, you can find it by just searching Wolf 359 Project. It's on Archive of Our Own. The PDF will be back up online officially soon once we've got some new artwork. But just Google is your friend. That can help you find these things.
I'm saying this off the record, so maybe I'll cut this part out. Okay, we're back. We've cut that part out for Paramount legal reasons. But yes, so Andy, thank you so much for joining us on Fickner Book Club. I appreciate it. I hope to do it again soon. There's plenty of other stuff on the Fickner Podcast family of podcasts, which is what we call this network, if you're interested. There's plenty more. There's a lot of Fickner Book Club stuff coming out because a lot of our shows are on hiatus due to these strikes that are happening in America currently between the WGA and SAG-AFTRA. Please do your research, support the strikes if you can. We are in full support of the striking unions and want them to reach a fair deal.
Yeah, we'd like Paramount to stop being dicks, and the other studios, but mostly Paramount.
But mostly Paramount. So please check out, go to our website at fictionpodcast.com, where you can find all the links to every one of our shows and find out what is on hiatus during the strike and what's being withheld during the strike. But there's other Fickner Book Club shows. If you're interested, we've recently started a bi-weekly rotation where the co-hosts of the Fickner Podcast come together to pick a book every week, and we talk about that. So 2 episodes of that are out now. We're going to return to Wasted Space, which is another sci-fi book that we started when we started this show a long time ago. And of course, you can check out Fickner Podcast. This is a Fickner Book Club. You can check out Fickner Podcast every other Sunday. Again, because of the strike, we've moved to an every other week format. You can check us out live if you'd like to join us for that one every Sunday morning. If you're in the States, every Sunday morning. I should reiterate, because you are not in the States, Andy.
I am not. As you can tell by my perfect Australian accent.
Exactly. Of course, and there's plenty of other shows that you can check out. We've mentioned Conversation. Season 2 is still going. I should probably plug that one. Andy was on Season 1, and Season 2 is going on right now.
I might be back in Season 3 to talk about another thing.
I want to get you back for Season 3. So stay tuned for more episodes of that. But anyway, so you can check us out on wherever you find podcasts. Of course, there's our social medias at Fickner Podcast. We have TeePublic and we have a Patreon if you'd like to support us financially. That's all linked below. And you can find me at BT McClure on Instagram and Twitter, and also write for CBR.com, AtomicGeekdom.com, and KaijuRamenMedia.com. And Andy, once again, your socials.
Andy 3E pretty much everywhere. The book is Wolf 359 Project, and the Great Derelict is at Great Derelict. I don't post on that much, so Andy 3E is probably your safest bet.
But those will probably be linked below as well. But anyway, so that's it, guys. Thank you so much, Andy. This was great. And until next time you see us, live long and prosper.